talk to you again this week about public policy reforms that really bring all Washingtonians of goodwill together, unite us in common ideas that we can all support to make life in the state better. Now, last week I introduced our new plan, a policy project, our plan to fight crime in Washington. Early response has been very positive to that, although a couple of people have said to me it was a little too academic, a little too abstract. They'd like practical points in what we can do to fight crime rates in the state, and we need to. If you look at any of the headlines around there, shootings near child care centers, there are hammer attacks at light rail stations. We need to stop this stuff. And so the recent questions have been, we like the idea, but practically, what can we do to fight crime in Washington? Fair point. Let's talk about a couple of practical steps we can take to fight crime in this state. First of all, and of most immediate interest, is we can sign and support Initiative 2113. It's out gathering signatures right now and will be until the end of the calendar year. What 2113 does is it restores law enforcement's ability in Washington to pursue criminal suspects. For decades in our state's history, the legal standard by which a law enforcement officer could chase a suspect was reasonable suspicion. If the officer had reasonable suspicion that the suspect had committed a crime, the officer could pursue. In the wake of the George Floyd riots a few years ago, Olympia went too far in the opposite direction, restricting law enforcement's ability to chase criminals. And they changed the legal standard to a more complicated probable cause standard. Lately, there have been some efforts in Olympia to pull that back a little bit, but they're brinksmanship. They're not really fixing the problem. Fixing the problem is to restore the standard to probable cause, and that's what Initiative 2113 does. It will free up our law enforcement to enforce the law, and that's a good thing. Second, we have to do something about simply the number of law enforcement officers we have in this state. Washington State has the lowest per capita number of law enforcement officers on the job of any state in the United States, and even the District of Columbia. So we're 51st out of 51 if you count DC. And then that gets us to our third point. One of the reasons we're having trouble finding good people to work in law enforcement is the matter of qualified immunity. Now, this is a controversial issue. It's been a hot topic in public policy for a long time, for many years. But qualified immunity gives legal protection to law enforcement officers against personal liability claims if the law enforcement officer is following the rules and best practices of their profession. And the law, of course. If a law enforcement officer breaks the law or steps outside the rules and best practices of the profession, then they can be held personally liable for actions they take. Again, in the wake of the George Floyd riots, Olympia overreacted and lowered the threshold for people to sue law enforcement officers personally for their actions on the job. And that has made a situation in this state where it is not a good thing for many people to get into law enforcement because the personal risk is so great. Now, there needs to be a middle ground here. We want to make law enforcement officers accountable for their actions, but we also don't want to make an open season on them for crazy, spurious lawsuits by any disgruntled criminal or criminal suspect there might be. Right now, the thresholds for personal liability of law enforcement officers in Washington state are too low. It's too easy to go against them personally. We have to restore balance in our qualified immunity laws in this state. And I'll add, it's not just law enforcement officers who need to be accountable. Judges and county prosecutors need to be accountable when they act badly and release criminals back into the streets too quickly or too easily. and encourage crime that way. So these are three things we can do, practical things we can do to fight crime in Washington, and you all can do them. Support Initiative 2113, restore police pursuits. Help your local cities, counties hire up on their law enforcement staffs, and let's find a common sense middle ground on the qualified immunity issue where we can hold people accountable when they act badly, but we don't create a situation where they can be sued willy-nilly and chased into personal bankruptcy because they're cops. 3 steps, practical steps to fight crime in Washington. There'll be more to come on these issues in the weeks ahead, but for now, have a great week.